You can easily spread this honey on bread and eat it, and it had been lying in an Egyptian tomb for 3,000 years. In a Peruvian jug, archaeologists found a potato that had spent 5 centuries underground and for some reason didn't rot. And in Brazil, a worker opened up the bathroom floor and came across a turtle. It had been walled up in concrete for almost 10 years, and it turned out to be alive. Actually, time doesn't give anyone a chance. Stone crumbles, metal rusts, bones turn to dust, and even huge empires sooner or later turn to dust. But sometimes something manages to slip past this law, and it reaches us whole, as if someone just paused it. Hi friend, you're watching Kurtop. Today we will travel through time from 5 million years ago to almost yesterday, and we'll look at 16 finds that simply shouldn't have survived. And I saved that very turtle from the bathtub for the finale. Its story ends very differently than you might think. The deepest cemetery, 7,000 meters down into the ocean. Humans almost never go that deep. It's eternal darkness there. The temperature is around 0. And the pressure would crush a regular submarine like a simple tin can. Sunlight has never reached this place in the entire history of the planet. And right here, at the very bottom of the Indian Ocean, lies a cemetery. Its size is beyond comprehension. According to scientists' estimates, in one area there are more than 10 million whale skeletons. In some places, up to 760 carcasses per square kilometer. That's denser than cars in a packed parking lot during rush hour. Only instead of cars, it's dead whales. And this field of bones stretches for hundreds of kilometers in every direction. It was discovered by the crew of a research vessel. The deep-sea vehicle made more than 30 dives along a strip 1,200 kilometers long. It's like traveling across an entire small country from end to end, only underwater and in complete darkness. What was lying below? The scientists called a whale graveyard. But what's so strange about that, you might ask? It would seem that at such depth in the cold and darkness, a dead whale should be preserved forever, like in a freezer. But it's actually the opposite. As soon as the carcass sinks to the bottom, it's attacked from all sides by hordes of scavengers, bacteria, and some truly incredible creatures. Bone-eating worms which have neither a mouth nor a stomach, but are able to dissolve and consume the bone itself. In just a few years, they strip a giant whale down to the last rib, leaving nothing behind. By all logic, the bones couldn't have stayed here for long, but these have been lying here for millions of years, and the oldest of them are about 5 million years old. Moreover, around each skeleton, a separate tiny world thrives. Blind worms, pale mollusks, creatures you won't find anywhere else on Earth. A whole ecosystem that feeds on death. And among the remains, they even found a whale, one that science didn't know about at all. A completely new species, raised from the depths for the first time. It was built by giants. On the coast of Northern Ireland, a stone causeway emerges from the sea made up of even columns. There are about 40,000 of them, and each of them has the shape of a perfect hexagon, the same kind of cell bees use to build honeycombs. The columns fit together so tightly and so neatly as if they were crafted on a lathe by a giant master, and then arranged row after row all the way to the horizon. You stand next to them and refuse to believe that this was made by nature and not by human hands. For centuries, the locals didn't believe it either. According to an old legend, this road was laid by a giant named Finn. He was building a stone bridge across the sea to reach another giant on the other side and fight him. Every stone was given a name. Here is the organ, here is the giant's boot, here are the honeycombs. It's a beautiful story. And tourists still come just for it. But then geologists got involved. And it turned out that a builder wasn't needed here at all. Once, huge flows of molten lava came to the surface from deep cracks in the earth. They cooled, and the molten stone contracted and cracked, just like drying mud cracks at the bottom of a puddle, only on a gigantic scale. The cracks converged at equal angles, and they naturally cut the rock into those very hexagonal columns. No giant, just cooling stone and physics. For a long time, it was believed that this entire volcanic saga stretched over 13.5 million years. But recently, specialists from the British Geological Survey, led by geochronologist Simon Tapster, recalculated the age of the volcano and reduced it by more than half, to about 5.5 million years. Chief geologist Mark Cooper explained simply, the process was much faster and fiercer than everyone thought. What looks like the slow work of centuries was actually a brief and furious explosion of the planet itself. People lived in the jungle. It was believed that ancient humans avoided tropical jungles. After leaving Africa, our ancestors settled in open savannas. Along the coasts, hunting and movement were easier. For years, scientists saw the dense tropical forest as an impassable barrier. It's dark and damp there, with little familiar prey. There are many diseases and predators. According to this theory, humans didn't venture there for a very long time. A discovery in the southern part of Côte d'Ivoire showed the opposite. At the Bété-Audin site, archaeologists unearthed stone tools. At first, it was only clear that people once lived here. It was impossible to determine the age. In the 1980s, when Professor Yodagede was excavating here, there were no precise dating methods yet. Several decades later, an international team returned to this site with modern technology and determined the age of the layers with tools. It turned out to be about 100 to 150,000 years. Moreover, these people didn't live on the edge of the forest, but deep inside it. Scientists sifted soil samples, extracted microscopic plant remains, pollen, and leaf particles. The result was unambiguous. Pollen from trees and palms that grow only in humid tropical forests, and almost a complete absence of grass pollen. This means that around the site there weren't sparse trees on the edge of the forest, but dense, humid jungle. This dating rewrites previous ideas. Before this, the earliest traces of humans in African tropical forests didn't go back further than 18,000 years. But here, it's 100 to 150,000 years, almost 10 times older. It turns out our ancestors mastered even the jungle much earlier than previously thought, and they adapted to harsh conditions better than they were given credit for. It's no longer possible to see this place with your own eyes. While scientists were working with the finds, the Bété-Audin site was destroyed. They started extracting rock there, and the ancient site disappeared. The team made it just in time. If it had taken any longer, evidence of humans living in the jungle 150,000 years ago would have been lost forever. The King's Giant Table. In the hills of the English county of Herefordshire stands a stone structure that locals have associated for centuries with the legendary King Arthur. 9 vertical columns support a huge flat slab. According to legend, it was here that Arthur defeated the giant. And the mark from the monster's fall is still shown on one of the stones. It sounds like a tale from a knightly romance, and for a long time, that's exactly how everyone treated it. And then, for the first time in history, archaeologists excavated what lies around and beneath the stones. The fairy tale faded away because reality turned out to be much more complicated. The structure was built by the first farmers of Britain about 6,000 years ago. That's 1,500 years older than the Egyptian pyramids, and significantly older than Stonehenge. Arthur wasn't even on the horizon back then. It would be several millennia before his time. A team from Cardiff and Manchester universities, led by Professor Keith Ray and Julian Thomas, discovered that this is not a solitary stone, but the heart of an entire sacred landscape with a mound, an entrance, and a procession area. In terms of scale, scientists compare it to Stonehenge and other great sanctuaries, only it was built earlier. And here is what completely turns history upside down. The people who built this were not just savages sitting in one place. A quarry was found near the monuments where they took the material from. And among the finds, there is rock crystal brought from North Wales, and a special volcanic stone from a distant Scottish island. That's hundreds of kilometers of travel, on foot without wheels, roads, forests, or rivers. 6,000 years ago, someone deliberately dragged beautiful, rare stones across half the island to place them here. So the giant really has nothing to do with it. But what really happened turned out to be much more interesting than any legend about knights. A copper smelting site in the mountains. In the Eastern Pyrenees, at an altitude of 2,235 meters above sea level, the Cova 338 cave is hidden. That's higher than 7 Eiffel Towers stacked on top of each other. The air here is thin and it's hard to breathe. In winter, everything is covered with snow. Even today, you can't get there by car. Neither cars nor any other wheeled vehicles can get through here. Archaeologists have to hike up on foot, carrying all their equipment on their backs. It would seem logical to think that ancient people had no reason to be in such a place. There's no food, no shelter, just cold and stone. For decades, this was the official version. The mountains were considered a lifeless backwater, a place that history simply passed by. Kova 338 proved the opposite. Inside, they found almost 200 pieces of bright green stone, malachite, from which copper is smelted. But there is no malachite in the cave itself. The nearest deposits are far below, in the valley. Someone deliberately dragged these heavy stones along with firewood up the steep slopes to an altitude of more than 2 kilometers. And nearby, archaeologists uncovered ancient hearths, and many pieces of malachite bear traces of fire. As explained by researcher Julia Monteslanda from Granat University, the stone was burned intentionally. This was a deliberate smelting process, a real workshop operated here under the clouds, and people came here more than once. Radiocarbon dating showed that people returned to this very spot again and again for 3,000 years, generation after generation. The path to the cave hidden in the mountains was passed down as a secret legacy, by word of mouth, for centuries. The cave also preserved something human. In one of the layers, they found a baby tooth and a finger bone of a child about 11 years old, and nearby, 2 ornaments. A pendant made from a seashell brought from the coast dozens of kilometers away, and a pendant made from a drilled brown bear fang. A talisman linking its owner to the mountain's most dangerous beast. Unique gold jewelry. In Saudi Arabia, archaeologists found more than 100 gold ornaments that are over 1,100 years old. And these are not just scattered fragments, but a complete set. Pendants, patterned discs, multicolored beads, and thin gold links that were most likely once strung together as necklaces. Among the finds, a large disc stands out with colored stones, arranged in neat rows around a central pattern. The items are made with surprisingly great skill. The craftsmen of that era would roll gold into the thinnest sheets by hand, apply embossed patterns, and set stones into gold settings with a precision that still had to be mastered. All of this dates back to the times of the Abbasid Caliphate, a state that ruled most of the Muslim world and gave history the so-called Golden Age of Islam, with its science, crafts, and art. The treasure was found here for a reason. The settlement the archaeologists were excavating was on the old pilgrimage road, traveled for centuries from Iraq to Mecca. Not only believers passed through such crossroads, but also merchants, goods, and money. That's why the place was rich and lively. Alongside the gold, they also unearthed the remains of the settlement itself: stone foundations, plastered rooms, hearths, pottery, and shards of glass. And the colored stones in the jewelry tell us something important. They couldn't have been of local origin. They were brought from far away. This means that this stop on the pilgrim's route was firmly woven into a large trade network, through which, more than 1,000 years ago, gold and gemstones were transported across half of the old world. An empire that was erased from the textbooks. In 2001, in the south of Iran, a river overflowed its banks and washed away its shore in the Halil Valley. When the water receded, ancient graves appeared from the ground, and it was pure chance. No one was looking for this place, and no one even suspected that there was anything there. It was just the river flood that revealed something science had never even imagined: an entire forgotten civilization, which was named after the nearest city, Jiroft. Stone vessels, completely covered with carvings, were lifted from the graves. Snakes, scorpions, predators, mythical beasts, intertwined so tightly that on the dark stone they seemed to move. Nothing like this has been found anywhere else, and their age dates back 4, even 5,000 years, to the very dawn of written history, to the times of the first great cities. We're taught in school that there is only one cradle of civilization: Mesopotamia, the land between 2 rivers, where the first cities supposedly originated. The first state and the first writing system. This is printed in every textbook, but Jiroft doesn't fit into it. Excavations here were led by the archaeologist Yusuf Majidzadeh, and he said it directly. This Iranian culture was not inferior to Mesopotamia, and in some ways even surpassed it. Other scholars disagreed, saying there was not enough evidence. The debate continues to this day. But Jiroft has one trump card that can't be taken away. Clay tablets with inscriptions were found among the ruins, And this writing system is unlike any other in the world, neither Sumerian nor Egyptian nor anyone else's. It's a system of symbols that has never been seen before or since. That's what's strange. We have proof in our hands that a whole people once lived here with their own language and writing. We are holding their tablets, but we still can't read them. It's as if this civilization left us a letter, but didn't give us the means to read it. What was found after the looters? June 21, 1971, 2 o'clock in the afternoon. In the south of Ukraine, in the Dnipropetrovsk region, archaeologist Boris Mazalevsky climbs down into the dig of a huge Scythian burial mound with the not exactly encouraging name Tolstaya Mogila. Everyone's mood is so-so. The burial mound is gigantic, and they've been working on it for a long time. And almost everywhere, ancient looters had already been there. You can tell by the broken vessels, the looted burials, and most importantly, by the emptiness where the gold should have been. The thieves were ahead of the archaeologists by more than 2,000 years. Mazalevsky himself is an unusual person, a historian, archaeologist, and poet. Throughout his life, he excavated about 150 burial mounds. He was a man who literally lived in this steppe. They say that before leaving for the excavation, he left a note with a bold promise to find something big and shiny. And now he is walking through a narrow passage. This passage was dug by those very robbers. He follows their trail into the main chamber to the burial of the king himself. And then something happens that makes an archaeologist's life worth living. In the chamber, which the thieves never reached, something flashes in the light of the lantern. Gold. A large object lying exactly where it was left 2,500 years ago. Mazalevsky himself later admitted that for a moment he was simply paralyzed. It was the pectoral, a massive golden chest ornament of a Scythian king, more than a kilogram of the purest gold, almost as pure as in a wedding ring. The diameter is more than 30 centimeters. And on it, about 100 tiny figures crafted with jeweler's precision. People are milking sheep, griffins are tearing apart horses, lions are chasing boars. An entire frozen world of the Scythians, cast in gold by Greek craftsmen at the request of the steppe nobility. What follows is almost a detective story. They wanted to take a find of this caliber to Moscow, to the central authorities. According to a beautiful legend, Mazalevsky was taking the priceless gold to Kiev, hiding it under an ordinary quilted jacket. In reality, things were much more serious. The pectoral was transported by train in a separate compartment guarded by armed police, and they managed to keep the treasure in Kiev. And it was precisely for this treasure that an entire treasury was created, which was called the Golden Treasury. And the pectoral is still kept there to this day. Today, it is stored in the Museum of Historical Treasures in Kiev, and it is considered priceless in the literal sense of the word. But if you really want to hear at least some number, over the years it has been valued at up to $200 million. $200 million for a piece of metal that lay in the ground for 2,500 years. And by some miracle, it didn't end up with ancient robbers or with those who later wanted to take it far from home. A hat from the other end of the world. Leather is the most unreliable material for archaeologists. In the ground, it is one of the first things to rot away, and after a couple of thousand years, usually nothing is left of it. That's why what was found in a woman's burial near the ancient settlement of Belsk in Ukraine is almost a miracle in itself. In a grave that's about 2,500 years old, a leather cap was found. Intact with decorations, it has survived to the present day, even though there shouldn't have been any trace of it left. It barely survived. When the leather was lifted from the ground, it started to fall apart right before our eyes. And the restorers had to save the find right there in the field. Otherwise, it would have just crumbled in their hands. The cap turned out to be low with a flat top, and it was completely covered with small bronze plates. Nearby in the grave were a bronze mirror, a black polished bowl, and dice. They buried not an ordinary woman here, but someone from the local nobility. She was very young, about 18 to 20 years old. Archaeologist Irina Shramko, who studied the find, noticed something strange. Scythians didn't make hats like that. This technique, where small bronze plates are sewn onto leather, is not typical for the Scythians at all, but it is well known thousands of kilometers from here in Central Europe. And when they did a DNA analysis, everything matched. The woman's roots lay far to the west. to a people who lived in the area of present-day Croatia. Even the shape of the hat itself resembles a traditional Croatian headdress. It turns out that a woman whose ancestors came from the other end of Europe was buried in the Scythian steppe, and the only thing that told her story, 2,500 years later, was a fragile leather hat, which by all logic should not have existed anymore. A dessert that has survived 100 generations. Imagine opening a jar of honey that's 3,000 years old. You scoop some out with a spoon and eat it without worry. Sounds like a way to get poisoned. But honey is the only food on the planet that almost never spoils. It's not affected by centuries or even millennia. The most famous example was found in the tomb of Pharaoh Tutankhamun, which archaeologist Howard Carter opened in 1922. Among the gold and treasures, there were stone vessels with a thick amber substance solidified at the bottom. It turned out to be ordinary honey that had been underground for more than 3,000 years, and it was still edible. During that time, dozens of dynasties changed in Egypt. Entire civilizations collapsed, but the honey just waited. The secret is that honey itself is a natural fortress against germs. First of all, it contains almost no water. Bees evaporate it from the nectar, and without water, bacteria and mold simply can't survive. Secondly, it's very acidic, about as much as lemon juice, and in such an environment, microbes die. And thirdly, bees add a special enzyme to the nectar, which gradually releases hydrogen peroxide, the same thing we use to disinfect scraped knees. 3 levels of protection in one product. That's why in ancient times, honey was not only a treat, but also a medicine. In Egypt, it was used to treat wounds and burns. In an ancient medical scroll written 1,500 years before the Common Era, honey is directly mentioned as a remedy used in healing dressings. And they were right. Honey really does kill microbes. Science confirmed this only thousands of years later. Your yogurt will spoil in a week in the fridge, but honey has outlasted the pharaohs. It saw Tutankhamun to his final resting place and waited until he was dug up. And even now, you could spread it on bread. The girl was being prepared for death. On the border of Chile and Argentina stands the volcano Archaeological. It's almost 7,000 meters high. There's half as much air up there as there is below. It's brutally cold. And just reaching the summit is difficult even for a professional mountaineer. It was there, at the very top, that 3 children were found in 1999. They had been in the frozen ground for about 500 years, yet were preserved as if they'd just fallen asleep. This isn't an exaggeration. The cold preserved them so well that you can see their skin, hair, eyelashes, and the folds in their clothes. The most famous of the 3 is called the Maiden. She looks like a sleeping girl sitting with her head slightly tilted. Not a dried-up mummy, not a skeleton, but a child, as if someone just pressed pause on her life 5 centuries ago. And now, here's something that gives you goosebumps. The children didn't end up there by accident. It was an Incan ceremony, which even has a name, Capacocha. For major events, the Incas sacrificed children to the mountain gods. Before their death, the child was prepared for several months. They changed the child's food to the finest kind, which only noble people ate. They gave them special drinks, and they let them chew coca leaves. Then they led them to the summit, into the cold, into the thin air, higher and higher, to a place from which there is no return. Scientists have figured this out in detail. Hair analysis showed how the girl's diet changed in the last months, and the plants placed with her in the grave helped determine the time quite accurately. The ceremony took place around the year 1499. That is, while in Europe Columbus was just beginning to explore the way to the New World on the other side of the planet, on the 7,000-meter peak this girl was already sitting there. Today, the maiden from Archaeological is kept in a museum in the Argentine city of Salta, in a special refrigerated display case. It replicates the conditions of the mountain peak, the same cold, the same humidity. Without this, the body would start to deteriorate. So the girl who froze 500 years ago is still kept in the cold, otherwise she wouldn't be preserved. And it is precisely thanks to this cold that scientists were able to reconstruct the last months of her life almost day by day. What she ate, what she drank, when she climbed to the summit. Ancient field ration. Fresh potatoes rot in warm conditions within a week. But on the arid coast of Peru, archaeologists found 2 tubers that are about 500 years old, and they didn't rot. They just lay there in a clay jug, embedded in the floor, wrinkled but intact. Since the times when the Incas ruled here, this is not just potatoes but chuño. It's what the Incas learned to make from ordinary tubers so they could be stored for years. The method is clever and relies on the local climate. They took the potatoes high up into the mountains, where at night there's a severe frost and during the day the sun scorches. The tubers freeze at night and thaw during the day repeatedly. They were then trampled to squeeze out moisture and dried further. The result was a light, hard product that doesn't spoil without refrigeration. Ancient dried food. Essentially, it was a long-lasting ration 500 years before army rations appeared. And here's the most interesting part. Chuño can only be made high up in the cold mountains, but it was found on the hot coast far below. This means that someone carried these potatoes across the whole country, from the icy peaks to the warm sea. And that's exactly what happened. The Incas drove entire caravans of llamas loaded with food across their vast empire and distributed it to warehouses. For the army, for workers, for the state. Light and long-lasting chuño was the perfect cargo for such logistics. Archaeologist Lidio Valdez, who found these tubers, immediately realized that the discovery was special. Although chuño was the main food of the Incas, it is extremely rare to find it in excavations. In the past 100 years or so, this is one of only a few such discoveries. The dry climate and the sealed jug saved the potatoes. Without them, the two tubers would not have survived to this day. The Stone Age met the 20th century. Imagine a place where the wind is so strong that trees can't grow because they're simply blown away. Bare rocks go straight into the ocean. There's cold water all around. And the nearest land is more than 60 kilometers away. This is St. Kilda, the most remote point of the British Isles. And on this patch of rock in the middle of the ocean, people lived for more than 4,000 years. They lived very differently from the rest of Britain. While people in London were riding trains and lighting electric lamps, on St. Kilda, it was basically still the Stone Age. They hardly caught any fish here. The sea was too rough. But they did eat birds, and not just a few. According to statistics, in just 1 year, the islanders caught more than 89,000 puffins. These are seabirds with bright beaks. They ate them like sunflower seeds. Getting food was more dangerous than any extreme sport. Men, barefoot and without any safety gear, would climb down ropes from sheer cliffs hundreds of meters high for eggs and chicks. They made pillows from feathers and sewed shoes from bird skin. They used fat to fuel lamps instead of kerosene. To survive winter after the birds left, they built over 1,000 stone storage rooms with perforated walls across the island. The wind blew right through them and dried the bird carcasses like a natural refrigerator. Nothing went to waste at all. And then everything collapsed in an instant. When ships from the mainland started coming to the island more often, people tried regular store-bought food and got regular mail for the first time, and they forgot how to survive on their own. Crops died in the salty wind. And without doctors, people started dying even from illnesses that were treatable. The last straw came in 1930. A young woman fell ill with appendicitis. They took her to the mainland, but she didn't make it. The islanders then wrote to the government themselves, and in the letter, which many signed with an X because they couldn't write, they asked for one thing: help us leave. There are only 36 of us left, and the old people and widows simply wouldn't survive the next winter. On August 29, 1930, the last 36 residents boarded the ship. They only took suitcases with them. The island, where their ancestors had lived for 4,000 years, became deserted in a single day, and no one lives there anymore. The real death railway. During World War II, the Japanese built a railway through the jungle to connect Thailand and Burma. So many people died on this section that it was called the Death Railway. Tens of thousands of prisoners and workers died during its construction. Later, a famous film was made about it, The Bridge on the River Kwai, which won an Oscar. Part of this railway has long been hidden underwater. When a dam was built in this area, the reservoir flooded the old Niti station along with the tracks and buildings. For more than 40 years, all of this lay at the bottom, hidden from sight. And in the spring of 2025, the railway returned. Repairs began on the dam. The water was drained. And from the shallow reservoir, the remains of the station appeared. Foundations, sections of track, concrete structures that hadn't been seen for more than 40 years. Tourists and researchers immediately flocked to them. Among them was an Australian whose grandfather died building this very railway in 1942. He tried to get to the station 3 times before, but the water was always too high. But the railway appeared only for a short time. Dam repairs will finish by August, after which the reservoir will be refilled. The old station, which came to light for just one summer, will go underwater again, and no one knows for how many decades. 5 cows took over the island. In 1871, a farmer named Urton left 5 cows on Amsterdam Island, bare, wind-blown patches of land in the middle of the Indian Ocean. The climate there is harsh, cold, damp, and constant wind. There were no people on the island. Urton simply dropped off the 5 animals and sailed away. After that, these cows were forgotten for about 130 years. For a whole century, they lived on their own, without people, without supervision, without any help. And they didn't just survive. From just 5 animals, a herd of several thousand emerged. The 5 abandoned animals quietly took over the entire island and multiplied as if someone was helping them. At first, scientists thought it was simple. 5 cows were locked on the island. They have been reproducing on their own for 100 years straight. So we have a textbook example of island evolution, when an isolated herd turns into something unique, something special. A beautiful story for a textbook. But geneticist Mathieu Gauthier and his colleagues sequenced the genomes of several animals and saw something completely different. There was no pure island herd in Pamin. About 3/4 of the blood in these cows came from European breeds like Jersey, and the remaining quarter from tropical cattle from the other side of the Indian Ocean, relatives of Madagascar cows. And there's the answer. Those very 5 cows were not the same from the very beginning. They already had very mixed blood. That's why the tiny herd was able to grow so successfully, instead of dying out from inbreeding, like isolated groups usually do. The island didn't reshape these cows. They arrived there already different, and that's exactly what saved them. A turtle under the floor. And now we've come to what I promised at the very beginning, the most recent discovery of all, and apparently the strangest. February 2025. The Brazilian city of Itacon. At the home of a woman named Louisa Master, she opens up the floor in an addition to check for dampness. The tiles are being removed, and underneath it, in a narrow gap between the concrete and the ground, there is a live turtle. According to the owner, the floor in the extension was poured with concrete 10 years ago. That's when the turtle got trapped. It spent all that time there, in the darkness, under the concrete, entombed alive. What saved it is that turtles can slow themselves down almost to a complete stop. Their heart barely beats. They need very little oxygen, and the animal lies in hibernation for months, spending almost no energy. It ate insects that crawled under the floor, and air and moisture seeped to it through the ground. So, on the very edge of life, it survived for 10 years in a stone prison. But this survival came at a price. From constant darkness and confinement, its shell became deformed, the concrete pressed down from above, and its body grew crooked, pressed against the slab. Its eyes became so unused to light that ordinary daylight now causes it pain. Right now, they are giving it fluids. They are feeding it fruits and slowly, carefully, getting it used to the sun again. It has defeated death, but this victory has left it crippled. 10 years in complete darkness did not pass without consequences. The turtle survived, but it came out into the light no longer the same as when it first ended up beneath the floor. And this is the whole point of what we've discussed today. Honey, potatoes, Scythian gold, a frozen girl on a volcano, an entire island and a herd of cows. All of this should have rotted, crumbled, and disappeared, but it reached us intact. And each such discovery adds a piece to what we know about ourselves, how people lived, what they ate, what they believed in, and what people were afraid of thousands of years ago. Time erases almost everything, and the little that time happened to spare, that's our true memory of the past.